This video goes over objective 4.3 part 3, and it is over the quadratic formula. Alright, the quadratic formula. When quadratics cannot be solved using any other methods, or when you're just not sure what method to use, you can always use this one. But just like a previous method said, in order to use this, you have to make sure one side of the equation equals 0. So there's a couple of definitions that we're going to need here before we get started. So first of all, standard form of a quadratic, we've mentioned this several times already. Standard form looks like ax squared plus bx plus c equals 0. A is the number in front of x squared, b is the number in front of x, and c is the constant. Now using those numbers, a, b, and c, we have the quadratic formula, where the solutions, or remember the x-intercepts, are opposite of b plus or minus square root of b squared minus 4 times a times c all over 2 times a. And that equation is actually, or that formula rather, is actually written on the back of that page up in the corner, just in case you need it. I tried to make it as neat as I could here. Let me know if you have any questions about that. Okay, now the discriminant is a very special part of this. The discriminant is the part underneath the radical. It's just that b squared minus 4 times a times c. Alright, so let's go ahead and try one of these out. So it says find the discriminant, then solve using the quadratic formula. So the first thing you want to do is make sure that your a, or the number in front of x squared, is positive. And then you want to make sure one side equals 0. Then we're going to go ahead and identify our a, b, and c. So a, remember, is the number in front of x squared, so just 6. B is the number in front of x, including the sign, so negative 3. And c is the constant, including the sign, so negative 5. The first thing that I would do here is go ahead and write out your entire equation. So in order to do that, we're going to just rewrite that formula. So we're going to do opposite of b. B is negative 3, so I'm going to make it positive 3, plus or minus square root of b squared minus 4 times a times c all over 2 times a. Oh, and I should have actually put what a was there instead of the letter, so 2 times 6. Okay, so I just plugged everything into this equation using parentheses everywhere I saw an a, b, or c, except for in that initial number right here, and I just went ahead and made it the opposite of b. So the first thing that we're going to do is we're going to find our discriminant. And remember, our discriminant is this number right here underneath the radical. So I just highlighted it yellow. You can type that in your calculator, or you can use order of operations, and you can do that part first. So if we do negative 3 squared minus 4 times 6 times negative 5, we should get 129. And so that's our discriminant, 129. Now, the thing about this discriminant is it actually tells us quite a bit about our answers. We'll get to that in a minute. So I'm going to rewrite this, keep that 3 plus or minus. I'm going to rewrite this so that that stuff underneath the radical is just 129. I'm going to go ahead and simplify the 2 times 6 in the denominator. So I plugged everything in. I found that number underneath the radical. Now I've rewritten it. Then I need to ask myself, is there anything else I can do to simplify? Can I simplify square root of 129? I can't, because it's not reducible and it's not divisible by any perfect square. So this is going to be my final answer. Now, if we plug that into our calculator, we would get 2 decimals. We're going to leave it as a radical because we are wanting exact answers. But if we wanted to know where this was crossing the x-axis, we would do 3 plus the square root of 129 and then we would divide that by 12, and we would get 1.2, approximately 1.2. And if we did 3 minus the square root of 129 divided by 12, we would get negative 0.7. Now I bring that up to show you that this is actually crossing the x-axis in two places. They're decimals, but they're still two real numbers. So when we're talking about discriminant, if we get a positive number for the discriminant, then we have two real solutions. If we get 0 for our discriminant, we have one real. And if we get a negative number, we're actually going to end up with two imaginary. So no real solutions, which means the graph would not cross the x-axis. Okay, now just to be clear, because I know that I got a little confusing there, this is all we have to do here. I just found the decimal equivalents to show you that it does cross the x-axis in two places. All right, let's try B. I won't go into all that extra explanation on this one. Okay, so one side is equal to 0. The A value is positive, so I'm going to go ahead and identify my A, B, and C. So A is the number in front of x squared, 3. B is the number in front of x. Now I don't see a number, so I know that's negative 1. And C is our constant. So now I'm going to plug everything in. X equals opposite of B, so B is negative 1, so 1, plus or minus square root of B squared minus 4 times A times C. Now I want you to practice typing in that discriminant into your calculator. Pause this right now, and I want you to type this part into your calculator without the square root. So just the negative 1 squared minus 4 times 3 times 2. Now when you do that, you should get negative 23. So 1 plus or minus negative 23 over 2 times 3. Now, if you didn't get negative 23, it could be that you forgot the parentheses around the negative 1. Those are going to be really important. I can't simplify 23 because it's not divisible by any perfect square. But since I have a negative 23, I can pull that I out, leaving just a positive 23 in there over 6. This is going to be our answer, and our discriminant was negative 23. You have to find that discriminant first to do the problem, so then just go ahead and write it down at the bottom. And remember, that tells us that there's two imaginary solutions there. Let's try another one of these out. So flip over and let's look at C. Notice that we have a couple of things wrong with this one. First of all, our x squared is not positive, and our one side does not equal 0. So since x squared is negative on the left side, I'm actually going to move it over to the right side. And I have to move that x as well. And so then I end up with x squared minus 4x, and then that 5 was positive, so I'll leave it as positive, equals 0. Now x squared is positive, one side equals 0. I'm ready to identify my A, B, and C. So A is your number in front of x squared, so in this case just 1. B is our number in front of x, so negative 4. And C is our constant. Alright, so x equals opposite of B plus or minus square root of B squared minus 4 times A times C all over 2 times A. So go ahead and practice typing in that discriminant. Pause it and see what you get. Okay, you should get a discriminant of negative 4. So when you type that into your calculator, you should have gotten a discriminant of negative 4. So that means when I rewrite this, it will be 4 plus or minus square root of negative 4 all over 2 times a. So once again, I can't simplify, or I can simplify the square root here, so I'm going to. 4 plus or minus, and that negative 4, the square root of that is just 2i. And 2 times 1 is 2. Now notice, and we haven't been able to do this before because we didn't have anything that reduced, but notice that all three of these numbers on the outside are divisible by 2. So I can divide 4 by 2, and I get 2. 2i divided by 2 is just I. And then 2 divided by 2 is 1. So I divided each one of these by 2. Typically we don't put a 1 in the denominator, so I'm going to get rid of that, and I'm going to leave this as my final answer. Alright, let's take a look at D. This is our last question. Alright, so the first thing we want to do is we want to move everything to one side. I notice the x squared is positive where it's at, so I'm going to move my stuff from the right side to the left side. Subtract 2x and add 9. So I end up with 4x squared minus 12x plus 9 equals 0. Then we're going to identify our A, B, and C. A is the number in front of x squared, B is the number in front of x, and C is our constant. We're going to plug it into our quadratic equation. So x equals opposite of b, so 12, plus or minus square root of b squared minus 4 times a times c, all over 2 times a. So once again, pause, type in that discriminant into your calculator, and let's see what you get. You should get a discriminant of 0. That's different. Means we're just going to have one answer. We have 12 plus or minus the square root of 0 over 8. Well, the square root of 0 is just 0. And adding and subtracting 0 results in the same thing. So I end up with just 12 over 8, which can be simplified. Simplifies to 3 over 2. So just one solution. That means it's going to cross the x-axis at 3/2 or 1.5.